I pointed out, 1% failure is over 250,000 Kenyans disenfranchised. They can't actually vote. Then I would not want to insist on just technology and people lose their constitutional right. So the paper copy is a paper copy of the verified voter register. It is not the original database. This is the verified one, and that's the one that is to be used. And therefore, it will only be used again as a backup, not as the primary purpose. But we must have something to fall back on as a country. I think if our elections do not work, we know historically where this country can end up. And so it's really important we have a way of ensuring that everyone's rights are taken care of. Chairman, it looks like a grim picture, but for us to look at the risks, when the insurance salesman comes to talk to you, or saleswoman, they tell you all about the issues. Your house will burn, your car will crash. They tell you about all those things, but no one is wishing those things on you. They will take your premium and hope that you actually don't have any of those things that they talk to you about. So I'm painting this picture on the basis that this is what can happen. But every day I'm praying that that is not what will happen. In fact, we're going to have 100% electronic use, and that this will work well. But unfortunately, the reality is that things can fail. And yes, we will have skills gaps, not enough training. And the reason I'm saying we review the tender specs is that the way they are structured now, we will not be able to have those manual options. And I don't believe it will take exactly the same time. We will not start from scratch. We would only review and add those amendments. And I believe it will put us in a safer place because it gives us then a basket, a base where we can fall to, where we have a manual process that helps us, versus where we are now, where there is nothing, it's only electronic, and we would get into a lot of problems.
Can you give the timelines there?
What is it that the tenderers have to do, or successful bidders have to do, and what is it that the Commission has to do when it comes to backup system? From where we sit, it's quite unlikely that we're going to request the vendors to actually be the ones providing that backup within the tender document. But there are certain inbuilt features in the specifications that will also allow the Commission the flexibility, including even printing out the register that is electronically generated. And we hope that when it comes to our session, we're going to provide some of those clarifications. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I wanted to commend Ezra for that intervention. At no time must any state agency, cabinet secretary, purport to speak for the IBC, because you should have, as Senator Mutula Kilonzo said, you are part of that technical advisory committee, and that's why I asked you the principal question: why didn't you ask these questions then? And I am sure if these now are concerns that are being raised, these are concerns which can simply give the IBC to ensure that they're integrated within that system as you created, because these are now those loopholes or those holes that are poked in a document, which is fairly, I can poke hole even into a document that is the zero draft. Poking holes is one of the easiest things when you're in the academia or in a technical kind of situation. So what I want us to do is to take these concerns that you have raised and submit them to the IBC, and they probably respond to some of these concerns. It's about part of the document that was presented. In fact, that was the first question I asked. Why didn't you just raise these things then to the IBC? So what the technical people in the IBC needs to do is to see how you can integrate these concerns, if that is how you can create a backup system that is foolproof within the system that you're creating.
Yeah, thank you. Just this is just for my own personal maybe clarification. When Senator Dulo raised about Isiolo being 41% or so covered, I think it is 16% on 3G. I noticed that Murang'a is 80.9% covered on 3G. In real terms, what does that mean in terms of transmission or electioneering?
Thank you very much, Chair. Let me again clarify that, one, I'm not speaking for the IEBC. The purpose of my presentation is that we have various risks that need to be mitigated, and that's why we need the paper copy, the manual option. Not that everything is broken and it is not working. I said these were mitigations for risks that are there, and therefore I'm not speaking on behalf of IBC, and I clarified that we gave them our feedback and input. But the questions here, first I raised showing what does it mean if you don't have 10% working, reliability. That's almost 2.5 million people being disenfranchised and so on. So it's very important that this conversation is about us having a manual backup system, not the primary system. And the reason we're saying we review is that since the current tender has been done based on the existing laws, it may actually require no amendments, but if we're going to have a solution where we include the paper register or the manual system, then it's important we make sure that everything is aligned. When we look at 2G and 3G, a 2G network does not have as much capacity as a 3G network. 3G, you're able to even have video. We're going to be seeing the forms being scanned and sent through the system. Right now, the 2G systems, from what we understand, are not able to provide the same kind of speed and quality of network to be able to transmit those files as opposed to the 3G network. How the IEBC will position all the polling stations is what will determine, based on the coverage in any of the counties, what percentage is fully going to be covered or not. So that's in their docket. What we presented is that the country itself, as a whole, has only 17% coverage of 3G and 78% coverage of the population. IEBC may structure it in such a way we have even more coverage of the population, especially on the polling stations. So the main difference between the 2G and 3G is the ability to transmit the data and the amount of data that is required. Thank you.
Maybe you can walk here. Walk the next microphone. There you are.
CS, just to advise my colleague and senior. In terms of identification of persons, that those who don't have fingerprints will have another identifiable feature. That is what I thought when I sat in the committee, because we were told that is like the eye. But I'm curious, CS, because I don't know what backup do we have at the airports, because every time I travel, I use my fingerprints and eye to be recognized either for exit or entry. Never heard of failure, never heard of manual backup or any backup at all. So I'm just curious, for purposes of educating Kenyans, what exactly do we do at the airport that is so different from what we want to do for the elections? Thank you.
So first, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I can answer. Okay. The airport systems and other systems are not as time sensitive, for instance, as the elections where you want to see the results immediately. So if the system is not working, they can take time to make sure that they verify who you are, they've taken a picture of you, they have your passport and so on. They have multiple redundancies that they put in place. But they're not under the same kind of pressure that, say, the country is in, where you have one day to vote and get everyone in place. Remember, even the numbers are put for you, the 99%, the 9.99% and so on, those already include the backups. That's how we are reaching at those numbers. which means the reliability for elections in Kenya are much, much higher. For instance, yes, terrorism and all those people going through the airport are key, but you can detain the individual until you have the systems working. But in this case, can we wait a day or two to get the systems back up and running? I think it's the difference on the importance that us Kenyans were placing, and this is for the whole country, not just that one individual. So immigration will detain people. If they feel that they don't have enough information or data about someone, they will detain the person until they have all the backups and information. And this is also a global immigration system, which is backed up in different ways. Thank you.
For me, really, to thank for the very able presentation that you have made to this committee. I'm quite sure you have enlightened most of us on the various key issues which touch on what we are discussing. You have enlightened us on the factors, the difficulties that are there. You have stated your view on what needs to be done to ensure that we have a free and fair election. And no doubt we shall take your contribution into account as we consider the contribution from other stakeholders. The only decision I have now to make is the Communications Authority. I think it may be better that we take on the Communications Authority before we take on the IEBC. Yeah. Cabinet Secretary, you are free to stay around, and I give you permission also to intervene if necessary.
And I want
if you have time.
Thank you. And I want to take the opportunity to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present, and to say that, as I've mentioned before, I am 100% hopeful we're going to have a fully electronic election with an option, with the insurance that we need to be able to move forward. Thank you, Chair.
You have a very enviable record on ICT matters, and that assurance carries a lot of weight. Let's wait to see how August goes. Thank you. Now the Communications Authority of Kenya, which is an independent body under the Ministry of ICT. So the fact that the Cabinet Secretary is there, you should speak your own mind on these issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to come and present. I'll be talking about telecommunications and network coverage within our country. And just to illustrate the difference in technology within our country, Mr. Chairman, allow me just to give a small illustration. In one of the countries within our continent, the country was preparing for an election. And as you know, we have a big difference between our rural areas and our towns. Then in one of the villages, a number of villagers decided to visit their son, who was one of the front runners as a candidate for member of parliament. Now, they went to the particular building where he was working, and when they went to the city, and they were ushered into his office, it was a glass door, and the office just opened. It was an automatic door. And of course, they were told to go in. They got scared. They said, why is the door opening by itself? So they went back. They were told, no, it's okay, you walk in. And the gentleman came and welcomed, ushered them in and said, walk, our doors are automatic. They went back to the village and said, our son does not have a watchman, he has spirits at his door. And that cost him an election. So just that shows...
Mr. Speaker, Mr. In this Senate, we don't speak in parables. You tell us which country it is, because you know you're giving specific examples. Please don't give us ladybird stories.
Okay.
Yeah. Nope.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, allow me now to just cover on the network coverage within our country. Last financial year, we did a study as Communications Authority on the infrastructure coverage within our country. And we've circulated the report, and this is what I want to share with the members. We are here on advisory basis just to share on the network coverage within our country. And Mr. Chairman, as our CS has indicated, we have 2G and 3G network. In terms of 2G network, we have, our country is covered to 94% within the country. So that means 2G covers voice and text. So that means within the voice coverage, we are covering 94% of the country. And it also means we have broken down into locations. In our country, we have 7,147 sub-locations. And within those sub-locations, it's 164%, it's 164 sub-locations that do not have any coverage at all. And in terms of, we've given the map to show, and I'm sure the members can see, to show the coverage within the various parts of the country, where we have all the coverage of 2G, and that means in those areas you can use voice, you can use text. Then on 3G, and this is crucial for elections, because 3G is what actually will transmit. That is what you can cover videos, you can send messages, you can send images. This is actually the system that will work in terms of electronic voting. We have 78% of the country. And as the CS indicated, that 78% covers the population. If you see in the map, it runs across the areas where we have where we have a high percentage of the population residing in. And in terms of the coverage, land mass, it covers 17% of the country. So effectively, it means we have 22% of the Kenyan population that do not have 3G. And I'm sure in when IEBC will be making its presentation, they will actually be covering in terms of how they are going to locate their polling stations. But you can see clearly that we are going to have a challenge, because we will have a huge part of the country that we are not able to transmit, because we have 17% of the landmass covered by 3G and covering 78% of the population. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We have also given a breakdown in terms of the counties. We have given the various coverages within the counties. And as Senator Dulo pointed out, for example, Isiolo, we have 3G, we have 16%, 16.4%, and we have a range of other populations. You have counties, some counties covered up to 90%, and we have counties that actually are very low. Some of the low areas, we have Mandera County, for example. The coverage of 3G is 9.4%. We have others. We have, for example, Garissa is 4.6%. And as I said, Isiolo, we have 16.4%. And we have a number also, like West Pokot, in the northern part of the country, we have 13.3%. We have Tana River covering 12.8%, and we have Turkana at 10.2%. Just to highlight the areas that we do not have 3G coverage, and of course across the country. And I think, Mr. Chairman, as we was discussing right from yesterday I think the challenge that the committee is facing is, so what do we do in these areas that are not covered? I think that is a challenge that is facing the House, and that is the challenge that we, as Communications Authority, are trying to offer some suggestions. And Mr. Chairman, as we've indicated, it is not possible to cover electronically in all the areas. We have this 22% that is not covered, and it runs across various pockets of the country. And as we know, in terms of election is a very emotive moment. No voter will want to come and be told you cannot vote. It becomes a very emotional issue. And also on top of that, it's a constitutional right. Whether it is a county that, for example, has 85% coverage, even that 15% needs to be covered to ensure that they can vote and the votes are transmitted. So, Mr. Chairman, in terms of this sort of gives in the whole idea that apart from voter electronic voting, we also need to consider other systems that we can deal with this. We are already in discussions. I know IBC, and I'm sure Mr. Chilopa will cover the technical committee, advisory committee that is working on possible solutions on the areas that are covered. So I'll not touch into that because I know that is an area that you will touch in terms of what are the options. But we as Communications Authority have sent a technical team to work with them to identify possible areas. But what we'll be saying, what the CS has proposed, we need to be practical in terms of having a manual backup to be able to back up even in areas that actually we do not have technology covering. So that on that particular day, we do not have a situation where people will go to the voting stations, the system have failed. If we use, for example, the 2G, we will have a major challenge. The ideal thing is to use the areas where we have 3G, we will not have major problem. I think the only thing that we'll be talking about there is the backup system that will be put in place. I know, for example, yesterday there were discussions on how many backups can we have in terms of electronic backups. Can we have 2, 3 electronic backups? That is possible. But I think what the CS Mucheru has proposed is that having a manual backup is a sure way of ensuring that at least at the end of the day, you have something to fall back to in case something falls. But in terms as a country, Mr. Chairman, we want to just admit that we have 22% of the population, 22% of the population that is not covered on 3G, which translates to a land mass of 17%. So we have the whole of the other area that we have to look for solutions. And as I indicated, Mr. Chiluba, I'm sure, will come up with discussions to come up with possible solutions in those particular areas. We've advised, for example, one of the options is to use satellite communication, and I think the committee is working on those modalities, and the IBC, I'm sure, will advise the committee on where we've gone. So, in terms of our presentation, Mr. Chairman, that is in brief our presentation to say we have a portion of the country that is not covered electronically, and those are the areas that we need to address. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Kandiye of the Communications Authority. Okay. Yeah. I'll start with the the youngsters first.
Yeah, thank you. First and foremost, I would really like to see a presentation to the National Assembly, JLAC, the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee.
Yes.
You did make a presentation to them. Do you have a copy of that presentation? You do have it. So I would want us to have a copy of it,
Yes.
because it will be important to see how it syncs with this particular presentation.
Yes.
My understanding
Yes.
is that you are saying there is a section of the country that is not covered by electronically. So the question is not a backup system. The question is, how do we cover that footprint electronically? And my understanding in your presentation is that you can do VSAT, satellite. So it is not true, therefore, to say that there is any fraction of the country that is not covered electronically. Because if you have an alternative in VSAT, it is for us to get a report from IBC to what extent have they been able to use the VSAT or the satellite technology. So in my assessment, the entire footprint, taking your own submission, the entire footprint of Kenya is covered electronically. Number two, I liked your submissions. You said you can create 2 to 3 electronic backup. So why would you want to create 2 to 3 electronic backup? And then, because Minister Mucheru was seated right there next to you, also said, plus you see what the minister is suggesting. So why would 2 to 3 electronic backup systems fail? You know, what are the chances of that? And lastly, in a light touch, I didn't want whatever you were saying, humorous as it was, to constitute any, this is Hansarded. And people can come and submit your evidence as foolproof. So for me, if you answer for me that it is not true to say any part is not covered electronically, because there's VSAT, and secondly, why would 2 to 3 electronic system backups fail?
Thank you. I'm aware, as Vice Chairman ICT, that the Communications Authority has had the Universal Service Fund for some time now. In fact, in your report, you quote 2.9 billion, yet in the last budget policy statement, which I presented on behalf of the committee, you have an allocation of up to 4.6 billion shillings for rolling out network capabilities in the country. And the only reason that you have been given such funds is in fact to ensure that the digital literacy program, otherwise known as laptop project, succeeds, because those gadgets are supposed to be 3G enabled. That's the reason. In fact, the national government is trying to have electricity in all the areas. Why has the Communications Authority not utilized that fund, the Universal Service Fund, to ensure that the 22% of the country that is not network enabled has been enabled? Now, I agree with Senator Omar that it's not that's a very bad example, because we don't want communities that believe in superstition. Otherwise, we'll have an election of superstition. We pray that they turn to Christ. My concern is as follows: that when you tell the country, like you have, that you don't have coverage, you create a gap, and the gap will be filled in by something we call WhatsApp platforms. The reason that we want to give Kenyans the confidence that IBC can have a system is to avoid people taking pictures of the results and sending them to various platforms, so that you start having what we call a parallel system of tally. So we need some confidence that people are not going to do those things. So that then you create a conflict where none is supposed to be. Number 3, we proposed in the committee, which was agreed, and it's in the regulations, and of IBC can tell us, that we have something called a URL system. It's called a public portal, where in Makueni, I'll be able to see results from a polling station in Isiolo, because the results will be sent to that portal. Now, what is the relation between that portal and the network you're talking about? Because the accessibility is for a person to be able to access results on a public portal where you can check the results, so that we can have a reliable system where every Kenyan can have confidence that a result has been scanned and sent to those places. And lastly, can we have, where you do not have network, satellite coverage? Because planes are flying in deserts for 22 hours and there is no network. What is it that Communications Authority can give as a proposal so that we can have a country where the 22% is covered using satellite technology before we can set up and use a universal service fund? Thank you.
Thank you, President Kilonzo. Fatuma? Oh, Judy. Oh, Fatuma.
Thank you for your presentation. I have... Sorry? Okay. Thank you. Now, my question still goes to the coverage. And you have clearly said there will be a problem of transmission with the areas that have problems, especially northern Kenya. What is your advice to IEBC as a stopgap measure to make sure that the results from those areas are not interfered with, or the people living in those areas can be able to transmit their results to IEBC without interference? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kandie, for your very concise and clear presentation. I think from your presentation, so even with 2G coverage, we are only talking about 94%, which means there is 6% of the country which has absolutely no coverage, zero coverage for 6% of the country. And I believe there will be voters in that 6%. So how will the IBC transmit votes electronically from that 6% of the country where there is absolutely no coverage? Two, even with 3G, you said about 22% of the country is in the area you call areas with identified gaps. We have a few months in general elections. Could you, as a commission, put in place measures that make sure that we have 100% coverage with 3G in these areas with clear identified ICT gaps? How practical would that be?
So thank you very much.
Related to what no, just related to what Senator Kirito has asked.
I've seen Safaricom digging trenches everywhere. We are told it's 4G advertisements. I thought the government of Kenya had an arrangement with them. And these the private people. Is there any connection that assistance you can get from them? Have you agreed on anything?
On that issue of Safaricom, because I try to, you're the regulator, and you talked about the fact that you are, one of the things that was averred why we needed backup is the fact that these electronic systems are in the hands of Safaricom and other private, investors, which effectively means that we are trying to avert that if this system is not within the hands of government, then there's cause that it can be interfered with. So you only have. So what happens is, ideally, there's no way that government would start laying down this type of network, isn't it? So I just wanted you to confirm that on record, that every other country that uses electronic literally outsources its system from private mobile telephony or people with electronic network coverage.
Yeah, there's something I forgot to ask. You didn't mention that this country is privileged to have 3 networks running under the sea into the country. And therefore, my question is, there's something called the last mile project. I know in my county, Makueni, you are supposed to have a last mile project. That project has not been commissioned yet, and it's not complete. What is the success? What is the relation between your last mile project on ICT to all counties, headquarters, and connectivity, so that we can understand in terms of the coverage and how the solutions will be activated to ensure that there is network coverage? Thank you.
Now, before I think we can complete this round, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kandia. There are a few issues. One, what is your projection in terms of time coverage that you would be able to have full 3G coverage in this country? Is that something that can be done within what period of time? And 2, and maybe this would still go to IEBC in terms of voter registration, because the contention here is voter identification. But in terms of voter registration, you still need the 3G in terms of voter registration process, and therefore, so that then the stopgap measures we are discussing are stopgap measures with regard to identification, and that means tied to the voting day. But then, throughout the period of voter registration, is the 3G network coverage needed for the registration process? And this other alternative alternative system, what are the cost implications? Are the cost implications too astronomical that then it has huge implication in terms of budgeting at the IEBC? And finally, my understanding is that you are discussing with us or sharing information with regard to the network coverage that is used within the primary process. At the end of the day, you still need backup. Once you have addressed, you have the 3, is it the 70-something% coverage, you provide for alternative system for the remaining 20% or so, but still, is it your position that said and done, you have 100% coverage through the existing network and through the alternative mechanism? Is it your position that you still need a backup?
And maybe I just add there. And if you still need a backup, is it possible to prioritize these backups? Because you have electronic backup and you have so-called manual backup, which manual backup depends on electronically verified data and so on. Now, is it possible to say you have the system, then we have backups, and in backups, the priority should be given to the electronic backup. And only if that electronic backup fails do we now resort to these other methods. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much, Senator Chair, and thank you, Senators, for your questions. I really appreciate. And we also appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation to you. Mr. Chairman, I would like to indicate, I think Senator Omar indicated our presentation to the Justice and Legal Committee. We will share that with you, but what we've shared is an abridged version of the same report. We took out the salient features that we thought was crucial, but we have the full information and we will share with you, Senator. The second question that you had raised, the question of, you have indicated the country is covered 78% on 3G, and you asked whether satellite can be an alternative. Indeed, as I mentioned, we have to explore technology. And as I said, satellite is one of the technologies that can be considered to deal with a challenge in areas that are not covered. And I also indicated that there is consultation with IEPC, and I think there is a technical committee that is working on that. And I'm sure IEPC will give an update to the committee, which will bring also in terms of turnaround, the coverage, the cost implications. There are a lot of RA technical issues that will come to the committee. But as I indicated, it is possible. Technology is possible. But of course, there will be other costs and other considerations. But this committee will be fully briefed. I'm sure Mr. Chiloba will brief the committee. It's something we've had discussions on. Then in terms of the other question was on is it possible to have 2 or 3 backups? It is indeed possible to have 2 or 3 backups. But what we were saying is you can, in terms of technology failure, it is possible for any technology to fail. Of course, it becomes the chances are lower when you have a series of backups. Then the chances are lower. But as even the other speakers mentioned in the morning, elections being a very emotive issue is not something that you can hold for some hours because there is a system failure. And we've seen it becomes very emotional. It becomes something that can explode. So that's why, as Kenyans, we need to develop systems that we have plan A, plan B, plan C. So that if plan A has a problem, we can go to plan B. If the system, if the problem is affecting plan A and plan B and plan B and plan C, we can even go to plan D. And that's why the proposal of manual backup being one of the backups, where you know you can't fail. At the end of the day, if the system has failed, you have a system that will not fail. Because as indicated earlier, you can have the register cleaned, you can have all the information cleaned, and you print out the same information so that when the system fails, and you have the same information in the system in a manual backup, where you've actually printed, you know this is Mr. XYZ, this is his photo, this is his ID, and this is information that was printed from the system. So you can easily fall back to that. And that is really where we're talking about backups that, as a country, we have backups that will not fail. We have plan 1, plan A, plan B, plan C. That way, we are sure we can't go wrong. Because we are also dealing with the emotions. The minute, if you say you are delaying voting for 2 hours or 1 hour, that causes agitation and that causes a lot of problems. And that actually sends, even what Senator Mutula indicated, people will start sending WhatsApp, and that creates a fire. And that creates a problem, and that's what we are trying to deal with, so that we do not have situations that can easily go out of control. Mr. Chairman, the other issue, I want to apologize first on the humor we gave. It was just to illustrate the diversity of technology and interpretation by people when they do not understand technology. But Senator Mutula has raised the issue of USF. I want to mention, and I will also indicate, I will also give a chance to the chair of Universal Service Fund, whom I've come with, Dr. Catherine Gao, to also say something. But, Mr. Chairman, we set up the Universal Service Fund to address areas that are completely unserved. And as you have seen in the report we have 164 locations within the country which do not have voice, do not have data. And that is what Senator Kiraitu was also raising. How do we deal with those issues? Before I address his question, I think the issue I want to address here is, as Communications Authority, we have prioritized those areas. And the question that Honorable Mutula, you had raised was why we have not utilized the fund. I want to assure the committee that we've actually started the process. We tendered for the locations, sub-locations that are not covered. Already, we have awarded for 78 sub-locations that are not covered. And the reason why we did this study was so that as a country, as an authority, we can have a scientific way of applying the universal service funds. And so we are starting with the areas that are not completely covered. Already we have tendered for 78 sub-locations. We've awarded a tender. And also, which also ties in with the e-radio of schools. We have already tendered for 896 schools for broadband connectivity. So we expect in the current financial year to bring in 896 schools to the internet, to the network, and also the 78 locations. That is close to 50% of the locations we are dealing with. Then next financial year we expect to deal with the other one, so that at least we bring the country where everybody can get a voice. Then now from there we can move to the next level. And Mr. Chairman, I will allow the chair of the Universal Service Fund, who actually drives the fund and looks at all the unserved areas, to comment on that before I comment on the next questions. Thank you.
And I now call upon Catherine Gahu to speak on your fund, and also make some suggestions as to how your fund can be used on a crash program to ensure that all these areas not covered are covered before elections. Is it possible?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think from the Universal Service Fund, first is to acknowledge that the fund is meant to serve the unserved and underserved. And you might ask, why are they unserved and underserved? They are unserved because the operators consider them to be commercially unviable. And therefore, this mechanism of providing a fund to address them was created a few years ago. The fund has become available to a large extent in the last maybe financial year, because in 2014-15 it was negotiating and correcting, and now we have funds that we have already applied. As he has said, we've already applied part of the funds. Actually, 2.3 billion will be applied to addressing the sub-locations that we have targeted. Our aim was to ensure that the unserved population is reduced to 2.8% by 2018. The challenge is that it takes time to implement this project. So even as we have tendered, even as we have readiness to implement, it will take time. And even in the bidding, we have faced challenges where some areas that we are willing to provide funding, the operators are unwilling, even for pay, to proceed. So they have actually bid less areas than even we intended. So what I would like to say is that the timing, it's a process that takes time to provide the unserved. They remained unserved because operators avoid those areas because they are also unserved with other infrastructure, including security, water, roads. Therefore, it becomes a very difficult place to go. So when we tender, the cost also actually, like what we had anticipated, it looks like we need much more money. So we'll be left with, after now this allocation, we have maybe 2.5 billion in the fund, which is what we had hoped to spend in the year 2017-2018 to continue advancing for this particular group. But please note that these current projects are actually advancing for voice services, 2G services, because if somebody is not able to even make a call, if they don't even have capacity to do SMS, it means they can't even do M-Pesa. They are locked out of the economy of this country. And so we've been focusing on that end with that solution. What I would like to say is that even that which we have initiated will take time. They cannot really be possible to address a solution for 2017 because they will be maybe completed by 2018. What I can say is that in the next election, it's possible that the fund will have been able to fully address the gaps, but there will still be a 1 or 2% because it has to do with the structure of the country, the fact that the geographical expanses make it very complicated to optimize networks for certain areas.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Any beginning on yours? Yeah. Would you want to be questioned now?
No, I want to ask Mr. Kandie. In fact, I think I'm very excited over the fact that you've been a true technical witness to a point where I think you've really helped me cover acres of ground in terms of appreciation. You put it in a very, for lack of a better word, politically correct language, that where it is not covered by network or electronic service providers, then you can do it through satellite. But it's an option that can be explored, but at a cost. So are you of the view that it is possible to do it within the next, if it was so said to be a viable option, can it be done by the next month or 2 or 3?
Yeah. You may answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Omar, for the question. Indeed, we said satellite is a possible option. The challenge that we have, of course, will be the cost, deployment in terms of procurement process, which will take quite some time. And I think that is an area that I would like to leave to IEPC to discuss, because as I said, there was a technical committee that is looking at how can we deal with the problem of the 22% of the country. And I think that is something that the technical team will advise on the cost and the turnaround time, whether it is viable. The challenge that we have, Honorable Chairman, is that we have a very short time, and we are trying to race up on time, and we don't want to race up and make mistakes. So I would rather that I give the opportunity to IEPC to elaborate more in terms of the cost, the turnaround time, whether it is possible even within the current public procurement system. So if you can allow me, Mr. Chairman, I could continue with the others, but I want to thank you very much, Honorable Omar, for that question. Mr. Chairman, the other question that has come up on public portal and accessibility, particularly in areas where there is no coverage. As I said, where there is no 3G coverage, really, then it's only voice that can cover where it is 2G. So in those areas, there will be challenges. Even if in terms of we have all these areas they are voting, you will be able to follow up to see, for example, if South Sea is voting and it is live, you will be able to track. But the areas where there is no coverage is where we have a challenge, because even in those areas where there is no internet, people will not be able to follow. That is where people actually rely on the traditional, the traditional radio or newspapers the following day. Even in terms of WhatsApp covers in areas where there is good coverage. So there will still be that challenge that still comes to us in terms of these areas that are not covered, that we have to look for a solution, not only in terms of the voting and monitoring the voting process, but also the people in that area to be able to access and monitor it live. So that is an area that even if we are to get satellite, for example, that will be for us in terms of being able to both transmit the information. People in served areas will be able to cover, but the areas that we're talking about, they will not be able to follow. Then the other area, Mr. Chairman, that we had a question. I think we have dealt with the question of the satellite, one of the possible options in technology. But the area that Senator Dulo has asked is in areas like Isiolo, Marsabit, Mandera. Are there options in these areas? How can we deal with these areas? And I think it is the area that I said we can explore satellite technology, but let's have a technical team review the cost, review the turnaround time, and be able to advise so that we can make a conclusive decision. Then in terms of what Senator Kiraitu raised, and I really appreciate that 6% of the country is not covered. And this is a significant population when you actually look at an election process. And the issue is, how do we deal with these areas? I think these are some of the areas that we said we are coming up with a technology like satellite, then we can cover on those areas. But we will still have to ensure that apart from that, there is another option that can work. And that option can work, which is manual. That can work. You can be assured. We have voted over many years. I think the issue that we have, honorable members, is an issue of trust. If we can allay the issue of trust within the country, I think it will make a huge difference. Because whether it is manual or electronic, where there is no trust, there will always be a challenge. People will always be asking, how did voting take place? Can it be manipulated from the back office? Because the system is set up by people, and it's operated by people. And there is a whole chain between the voting process and transmission and up to the final end. So I think it is an area that maybe as a country we need to build on the trust and actually assure that even the areas that we are looking at, we look at practical solutions that are good for us, that can enhance our transparency and trust in the process. Now, Mr. Chairman, the other question was on the 22% not covered by 3G and what measures we can put in place to ensure that these areas are covered and whether it is practical. In terms of practicality, it will not be possible within the time we are talking about for the 22% in terms of moving 3G. But what we've seen over the years, technology leapfrogs, moves very fast. Chances are within the next 2 years, technology will have changed, we'll have covered the entire country. Because it was not long ago that we did not have mobile. It was not long ago that we started rolling out internet. It was just a few years ago that majority of the people started using smartphones and other technologies. So, but for us to deal with between now and August, I think we come up with practical solutions that we can deal with, and that's what we are saying. For the 22%, we'll have a different solution now, but in future, definitely, there are solutions that are coming. And maybe by the next election, this will not be even the debate we'll be having. Maybe it will be a totally different item altogether. There was the question of, we have operators running. Does government lay down its network? I think the answer to that is governments all over the world don't lay down their networks. We used to have in the history of telecommunications, it used to be the government. And then from there we had the incumbents. Then it was liberalized and privatized. In most of the countries today, it is operators, but they are licensed by government. As Communications Authority, we license the operators. They have obligations. We have confidence in the work that they are doing. So in terms of their network, we have confidence in their network. We have confidence that they will do that which their license provides them to do. So we shouldn't have a problem in terms of transmitting, in terms of using their networks. There should be no problem at all. These are operators licensed by a government agency to provide a service. And in terms of the last mile, Senator Mutula raised the issue of last mile. How far are we in relation to the county headquarters? In the last mile, we've made quite some progress, and actually that's why we are saying we want to ensure that at some point within the next 5 years, we have actually covered the whole country. And one of the objectives of universal service is to actually ensure that the areas that we are not covered, we are covering. And on last mile, we are working closely to ensure that we cover all the counties, and we are able to cover and ensure that now from there, we move to the locations and the sub-locations. That's why in our study, we were very detailed. We went to the sub-locations, the smallest administrative units, because we know that if we reach all the sub-locations, then basically we'll have covered the country. Then in terms of projection again, in terms of 3G, what duration will we be talking about? As I mentioned, I may not have an accurate projection, but what I can only say is technology is mutating and changing very fast. At the moment in the cities, we are talking about 4G, we're talking about 5G, and what will happen is it is rolling down, going downstream. So, and as technology moves, it tends to be faster over time. The other question that we have was on voter registration and whether we need 3G. I think that is an area that I would like to allow Mr. Chilopa to answer because it is falling on his docket. I would like to respect and allow him to give the details on voter registration, what kind of technologies they are using, and also in terms of credibility and viability of the voter register. Now, Mr. Chairman, the network we are talking about is actually the primary network. As Senator Sang raised, do we have alternative backup, or do we need alternative backup? And I think the Chair, you also raised, do we then need to prioritize the backups? I think the message that we would like to advise to the committee is let's have a backup that will not fail us. And one of the backups that will not fail us is the manual backup. We can have 2 or 3 other systems that will mirror down on one another, but down the line we have a manual backup because, as even the CEO of IBC indicated yesterday, which is the position, is that voting is manual. Let's have a backup that is manual, so that when somebody asks a question, even the agents, for example, the agents can be able to say, we know in this ward there were 300 people who voted for so and so, and instead of discussing on whether the system has been hacked or not hacked, the manual backup will actually show we all signed this and this is what it is. This is your evidence. You saw it was 350 votes for this candidate, and this is how it is. I think this will address a lot of issues in terms of even suspicion. And as I said, there is a huge difference in technology in our urban areas and in our rural areas. That agent at the rural area, who is an agent of a candidate, may not even understand the technology, but they know that there were 350 people who voted. So they can be shown, you actually signed to show you are 350 people who voted for your candidate, then they will not send messages. They will not say it was 13,000. They will actually say, yes, I signed for 350. So I think in terms of priorities, let's have manual as a backup as one of the priorities. We can have 2 or 3 backup depending on the cost in terms of the system, because the system, it means if the system fails, you can go to the other system in terms of PPR, in terms of PVI also. But if it fails, you can produce the register and say this is so-and-so. You can see the picture, you can see the ID, and the person can vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you very much. I thank Mr. Joe Mucheru for your presentation, and also, of course, Catherine. It appears to me that a lot may depend on this satellite thing. We are talking about manual backup, yeah, maybe to me it should be the very, very, very last resort. The other backup should have priority. And in that priority, this satellite thing is extremely critical. And you said that there must be a technical team to assess the cost and the turnaround time. Surely, is this something that can be done fairly urgently to make sure that the satellite can cover the entire Kenya? I mean, how much time does this technical team need to assess the cost and to assess the cost? How much time does it really need? Me, I would have thought it's not much time. And that is something that can be in place well before August. However much it costs, because democracy is expensive, elections are expensive. So however much it costs to ensure that we have a free, fair election, is to have the satellite also. And it should be in place. And only if the satellite fails, should you now go to manual. Can you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Indeed, the committee can work within a shorter time. I am aware that they had been given up to 20th January to come up with preliminary results. So I think within January, Mr. Chairman, they can come up with a report. At least I'm aware of that, the workings of the committee. And I'm sure my colleague, Mr. Chiluba, can also shed some light on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I thank both of you for having taken time to come here and make presentations, which to me are very, very valuable, actually extremely valuable to us. And we may call you again, particularly on this issue of this committee. It has been given up to January, but I would like to know roughly how much it will cost and whether this committee cannot recommend that this satellite system should be in place.
Mr. Chairman, maybe on the same score, since you're a government agency, one of your roles is advisory. So what the chairman is telling you, we reserve you as an advisory capacity, because there are also quite a number of questions. Sometimes there's communication. It's such that you see other Kenyans are trying to ask us questions on their behalf. If you scroll through this, what is it called, the Twitter, there are questions coming in. So for me, what I will do, I'll compile them, so that then we can have you respond to some of them, because they address some of the technical issues that are in contention.
Okay, I think really.
It will take less than a minute.
A comment?
It's a comment.
You can't make it be within the committee.
No, it's for the Technical Advisory Committee.
Yeah.
One of the things that we proposed in the Technical Advisory Committee, in which Ezra Chiloba is sitting, CAK is sitting, Minister Joe Mucheru, Attorney General, you have of course not called the politicians who are supposed to be there. One of the things we have proposed is that you should communicate regularly to Kenyans. Senators sitting here saying they actually don't have the information. There are senators who are not even aware of something called the Universal Service Fund. Is there a way that all of you can find a method of issuing communication to the public so that they are aware of what you are doing on a regular basis, so that we stop second guessing and waiting for committees like these ones and agencies like the ones the Speaker mentioned to communicate such basic principles like network communication, satellite technology, etc., etc. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Now, way forward. I can see it's almost time for lunch. The IEBs will take a very long time. I don't want to start.
Let's take the religious group.
The introduction.
Let's take the religious group, Bana.
But what we can do very quickly now.
Let's take the religious group.
What we can do very quickly now, I'm now giving directions. Hold your horses. Is that there are two groups here which were here yesterday. Is that only two groups, because they are very short, we can finish them before lunch. And one of them is the Inter-Religious Council, whom I promised yesterday that you'll be the first, but when we began you are not here, but maybe you can make your presentation. And also, I would want Communication Authority to hear a very brief presentation from the National Council of Persons with Disability. I think we can finish those two and then go for lunch. So, Inter-Religious, where are you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Inter-Religious?
Yes.
Where are you?
I'm here.
I thought I saw somebody with a...
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually a technical person. I'm the chief executive of Inter-Religious. The religious leaders are actually at Biblica. Yesterday we didn't have a written, we have come with a written, but they have asked if they can be allowed to be the first one in the afternoon. There is some consultation which is taking place, and the religious leaders have asked that they be the ones to give at 2 sharp, they be the first ones before the IEBC. And so I would propose, if it's possible, if you allow, the persons with disabilities can go, okay. And then we do it at 2 o'clock if it's agreeable to the committee.
Because they are men of God and they must put God first. We can consider that. They'll be ready at 2 anyway. That's what you are telling me. What about the National Council for Persons with Disabilities? Yeah, I think let me give you just be brief, because you have come with the written. We can read the document. So just be brief so that people can break for lunch.
Honorable Chair and honorable members of the Senate, the fourth estate, I know very well that when it is just before lunch, the glucose level are very low and the attention, therefore, is also very low. But I'll try to be very brief and so that we break for lunch. Honorable Chair and honorable members of the Senate, I feel humbled and honored to stand before you because this is a rare opportunity that I cannot take for granted. Honorable Chair, I'm too junior to stand before you, but my message is bigger than all of us because I speak on behalf of 6 million Kenyans with disability. Let me make it very clear that persons with disability support digital voting system, but every digital system has manual backup. AG, the digital voting system of the Honorable House of Senate, is backed by manual voting through Standing Order 75. The world's most sophisticated mode of transport, that is the aeroplane, has an automatic landing gear, which is still backed by a manual landing gear. Both honorable houses of Parliament have cited various reasons to support or oppose BVR kits, including technical failure, loss of network, and power failure. But none of you has remembered the larger population of persons with disabilities who are directly affected by digital voting system. Some of our disabilities do not allow us to use BVR kits in any way. For example, fire victims who have lost both eyes and all fingers. There are also those affected by neurological conditions, hence loss of sight, as well as suffering from
muscular atrophy. A sizable number of Kenyans voted using BVR kits in 2013 because they were able-bodied by then. But through fires, diseases, road traffic accidents, or violence, are now persons with disabilities, therefore are no longer eligible voters if we are to go by these rigid election laws. I'm sorry to say that some members of the Honorable Houses are suffering from me, myself, and I syndrome, a syndrome that allows us to think what is possible for us is possible for everyone else. Or how else can I explain the assumption given to members of parliament who acquired their disability while serving this 11th parliament? And you all know the example of members of parliament who have acquired disability while still in this house. In 2013, they were voted in while they were able-bodied. Now, they are persons with disability who require assistance during voting in the general election of 2017. Our election laws may have assumed these dynamics, but Article 38 of our Constitution under subsection 3B provides that every adult citizen has the right, without unreasonable restriction, to vote by secret ballot in any election or referendum. 2, under Section 30 of Persons with Disability Act number 14 of 2003, provide that polling stations shall be made accessible to persons with disabilities during election, and such persons shall, in addition, be provided with the necessary devices and assistive devices and services to facilitate the exercise of their rights under this section. Mr. Chair, sir, under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, which Kenya ratified in 2008, under Article 4.1b, General Obligation, state parties are obligated to take all appropriate measures, including legislation, to modify or abolish existing laws, regulation, custom, and practices that constitute discrimination against persons with disabilities. Article 5.3, Equal and Non-Discrimination, state parties are obligated, in order to promote equal and eliminate discrimination, state parties shall take all appropriate steps to ensure that reasonable accommodation is provided. Honorable Chair, sir, the same Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, under Article 29A1, participation in political and public life, state parties shall ensure that voting procedures, facilities, and materials are appropriate, accessible, and easy to understand and use. I'm sure this Honorable House will not contravene Article 38 of our Constitution, Persons with Disability Act of number 14 of 2003, an international instrument domesticated by Kenya by locking out a sizable number of Kenyans from voting through the use of rigid election laws. We, the 6 million Kenyans with disability, request for a backup or alternative means of voting in case our members are not able to use BVR kits, because this will not be the first scenario where digital systems have manual backup, like the case I cited earlier of Standing Order number 75 of this Honorable House, which gives an alternative manual voting in case of technical failure. As a Kenyan citizen, I was shocked to see how reasons was thrown out of Parliament windows only to be replaced by dirty politics of patronage, abuses, and name-calling, including the infamous abuse to our head of state, who is not even a member of Parliament, hence had no power to either debate or vote in the House. If a section of Kenyans are denied their constitutional rights of voting because of power failure, technical failure, lack of network, or worse still, if they are denied because of their disability, then I'm worried that this may lead to another post-election violence of greater magnitude than that we witnessed in 2007-2008. Unfortunately, if such happens, it is persons with disability who will suffer the most. Honorable Chair, sir, my humble request is that this Honorable House listen to the voice of reason and join us in advocating for peaceful election by considering all scenarios and coming up with a voting system that does not exclude any Kenyan. Thank you. God bless you all. God bless Kenya.
Thank you very much for your presentation, which to me was very, very clear and straightforward. But if there are any interventions?
Dr. Nice to meet you again. Yeah, we have been advocating for disability rights all our lives since we started our professional callings. And I totally share with your sentiments expressed therein. The fact is that the law or the convention requires certain measures to be put in place to ensure we facilitate those with persons living with disability in the event the main system might disenfranchise some of those people. Those, in my assessment, are in the minority. Well, so that does not mean that we revert to a manual system. There could be other ways of even ensuring that we are able to facilitate the voting. The voting here means that your vote, your right to vote, is not disenfranchised. What we are seeking here, in my assessment, is not the political superfluous. It is the technical intervention of, in the event these systems fail, how do we facilitate all these disenfranchised voters? So I think we take your voice of reason very positively, but the fact that people have competing ideas does not mean that they lack reason.
Good. Any other comment or yes?
Only that your presentation, although it's to the Senate, seems not to have considered the fact that the Senate distinguished itself yesterday in terms of how we conducted ourselves. I've seen your comment about Parliament, but I'm sure you meant the National Assembly. Maybe you should have complimented the Senate for acting with decorum, as opposed to casting your blame so widely against all of us. Yet you didn't see any of us throwing a punch or a shoe yesterday. Thank you.
Okay. Fatuma Dulo.
Thank you, Chair, and the Chair Disability for your brief presentation. I have worked with Disability Council sometimes back as a legal officer, and I know we are alive to Section 29 and 30 of the Disability Act. I just want to hear from you clearly. You are not only having a problem with alternative, but you're already having a problem with the existing. Is that the position? That is the first question. And secondly, of course, the current facilities we have in terms of voting for people living with disabilities, especially the Braille and other facilities that we require. Has the IBC put that in place? Because voting is your right, and as people living with disabilities, you have a right to that particular exercise. Those are my questions. I thank you.
Thank you, Madulo. Meru, the Lord for now. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Daktari, for this very precise presentation. One, thank you, because I think we the politicians sometimes, as you rightly put, we tend to imagine that everybody is like ourselves, and I think that is really
important. What I get from the presentation is that the primary, whereas the primary system is what would be the first instance for most Kenyans. For persons with disability, what we are discussing as a backup might actually be the primary sort of mechanism for you, you know, and therefore the whole discussion on primary on the backup and the backup being electronic needs to take into consideration that there is a very huge constituency of Kenyans who might be disenfranchised by the primary process, but even if the primary process was to fail, the backup existing would still be a problem. So that then, as we look at this proposed mechanism, we should be able to look at a mechanism that would not only address the backup for the many millions of Kenyans who are okay, but also looking at disability, appreciate that there is a manual process that can actually, you know, act not only as a backup, but actually as a primary, mechanism for persons with disability. And I think the insightful presentation you have given to us would be very useful to the committee in terms of moving forward.
Chair, if you'll allow me, because Daktari Sankok might not be here, and I see my brother Ezra is there. Ezra, maybe this is more appropriate to you since we brought you in other situations to seek clarity. Have you considered the fact that there are people living with disabilities who might not be able to use the system as it is, as proposed, and therefore are making alternative arrangements? That does not necessarily mean it's a manual system.
Mr. Chair, we've taken that into consideration in designing our specifications. But again, you see, disability comes in different forms.
Yeah.
So you also have to be versatile and open to the idea that you must provide alternative methods that will address the issues of the different types of disabilities. Yeah, so, and we'll perhaps elaborate on that further during our presentation.
Very well.
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, let me start by appreciating the House, because I didn't know that in Senate, actually most of them are advocates of persons with disabilities, especially Honorable Omar, Senator Omar, who was my mentor when we were in the university.
And
he was a student leader.
I've also included you in the reproductive health care bill very well as the persons with disabilities.
Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Making reference to mentors, not those who included them in a bill-making process.
Order, Senator Omar.
Senator Omar was a student leader in Moi University, and I was also the chairman in the University of Nairobi. He actually gave me very big lessons on how to be a good leader, and I hope I lived up to that. And yes, we have a lot of challenges, but I've just realized I don't really have to make a lot of remarks, because already the House is alive to the issues of challenges facing persons with disabilities, especially Senator who was once working with the National Council for Persons with Disability as a legal officer. She actually understands every challenge that we face, and I can only but appreciate. I also withdraw my earlier remarks of generalizing the House, as Senator Mtula said. I'm very sorry. I really did not mean the Senate. I meant National Assembly. Maybe sometimes language is a barrier, so I'm very sorry. We really, as a country, appreciate what have been transpiring in the Senate. It actually showed a lot of maturity, and political differences were put aside for the sake of the nation and for the sake of all of us. So I can only say thank you. The only thing that I have is that the message for IBC, because their answer to Honorable Omar was very brief, meaning that they actually may not have done a lot. if you hear such a brief response to a broad question that was asked by Honorable Omar, I can only tell my friends that you have really to up your game, because you may not have done a lot for persons with disability. You may actually need to come to our offices. Our legal officer is here, and our mainstreaming department is there, so that they give you some few lessons on disability mainstreaming. Otherwise, thank you very much, the Senate. Thank you very much, Chair. I really do appreciate it.
Chairman, to be fair to Ezra, he actually said he was going to give a more expanded explanation once he is now giving evidence.
Senator Omar Hassan, I am sure Chilova is better placed to speak for himself. And
Yeah, Mr. Chair, first of all, to also say that the technical committee that we set up under the new laws, which includes a representative of the persons with disability. In fact, I think the CEO of the council has been coming for those meetings. That's how I know these things. So, and when I say elaborate presentation, it's because we really want to put some of these matters to rest. And I'm waiting for that particular time. Yeah, so, and I have my team here who are also going to help me answer some of these issues. Thank you.
very well.
I think it's time for lunch. Now, the IEBC have been quite patient yesterday and today. And is to do IEBC. So I feel strongly that we give them the time that they need as a matter of priority. And therefore, when we come from lunch, I would only allow 5 minutes for the interreligious group, 5 minutes, and then we go to IEBC, and then we see how far we shall go today. Don't give up. We may hear you all today, because you are prepared to do this thing properly. But this needs to be heard. So, unfortunately, we are in recess, so our cafeteria is not there today. So, I would ask you to make your own arrangements, and if you can come back at 2 o'clock. So I'm giving you just about 40 minutes for lunch. We come back at 2 sharp. We hear a presentation from interreligious for 5-10 minutes. 2 o'clock. I am in a religious group. And then IEBC. It's going to be afternoon. Yeah. And then please do come, because even the people from other groups or individuals who have come, I think it's good for you to hear from IEBC, so that when you ultimately make your presentation to us, you take into account what they have stated. Okay? So I adjourn the meeting to 2 o'clock. Thank you. Now for the committee, can we...
This is NTV. Did you know electrical appliances on standby mode still spend 20% of the energy they would require while fully operational? Always switch off appliances completely to save energy. Kenya Power wishes you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year 2017. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give.
Tango Japana 290255 kushinda mamilioni ya pesa. Kuna hadi milioni 30 za kushindaniwa. Kuwa mshindi wa Tegua Chapana 29025 ni rahisi. Anza kwa kutuma neno NTV kwa nambari 29025. Kumbuka, tuma neno NTV kwa nambari 29025.
Business has to go on hata kama niko holiday this Christmas with my baby over there and those little fellows over there. I am still connected to my very powerful Wi-Fi from my fiber-connected island over there. Washa nikuambie, I have no reason to become rich from Escado. When you run your business with the support of a fiber internet connection, you have no option but to become very rich. With speeds of up to 100 Mbps, pesa ya Escado ni kidogo sana kwangu. I don't need it. I only need fiber. Merry Christmas and enjoy your holiday. Tupatane 2017. Ni atia.
Yani there's a bullet which is female and there's a bullet which is male.
We have covered a range of topics, from those that have inspired us, others that have challenged us, and of course the ones that have made us laugh.
If there's one thing that I make no apologies for, is that I'm a woman, and a beautiful woman, and there are some aspects of my life that God made me as a woman and that can never change.
I wish I grew up those days where I come home and I'm given a wife. I'm told she's here.
This Thursday, we take a stroll down memory lane and recount our favorite moments.
Okay. Go. I don't think I can go beyond that. You beat it. You're a survivor. Yeah. You're a conqueror.
Yeah. I am here for very many years, healthy, because I walk by faith, not by sight. I love my life.
Reminisce with us this Thursday at 8 p.m. Kenya Power wishes you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year 2017.
Give your clothes that teddy bear softness you love with the new Gentle Care fabric softener and conditioner. For clothes so snug, it feels like a hug.
Sijui kama nyinyi inakuwa shida kama yangu. Mshahara haiwezi ona giza mbili. Sijui kama nyinyi mnakuwa na hiyo shida. Ukilipwa saa hii uone giza, kesho ukiangalia giza hauna mshahara.
In our appreciation for making us your #1 preferred premium dairy brand, KCC has